So for this video, I want to talk about 10 underrated books by popular authors. A lot of these authors are some of my favorites. I would include them, not all of them. Most of them would be in my top 10. I think all of them maybe in my top 20. I don't know, that's a different discussion. But anyway, all of these books are, or I should say, none of these books are their most famous works by any means. In fact, I would consider all of these books underrated. Probably a lot of people haven't read of these books, maybe even some of these books you've never heard of, but you've definitely heard of these authors before, especially if you've watched my channel in the past. And yeah, we're just going to talk about some underrated books that I want y'all to check out. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So first off, I'm not going to talk about this first book in too much detail because it's a Stephen King book, and I already have a Stephen King underrated books video. If you want to go check this out, he has a lot of underrated books. Probably his most underrated, and actually one of my personal favorites, even though a lot of people really don't enjoy it, is Roadwork, which was one of the early Richard Bachman books. And I understand why people don't like it, but I completely disagree. It's actually a very interesting character study, and it doesn't really have any horror elements, and it doesn't really have any plot elements until like the very end. It's just about this disgruntled guy named Barton Dawes, and this highway company is going to basically plow through his business in order to continue the highway, and he's mad about it, and he keeps denying them, like they want to pay him off, you know, to have access to it, but he's just like, nope, I'm not doing it. And eventually they're like, well, we're going to do it anyway. And the whole story is basically just him kind of slipping into madness very slowly. And yeah, I think it's very good, very compelling. A lot of people cite it as his worst book, if not like in his bottom 5. I completely disagree. I really like it. I've reread it a couple times, and I have fun with it every time. So if you haven't read it, definitely check it out, but definitely know that it's very different from a lot of Stephen King books that he's written. So beware of that. The next book I want to shout out is Driving Blind by Ray Bradbury. And I want to mention this one because if you don't know, I'll link it down below, but I've started the Ray Bradbury book club over on the Bookastromer Discord. We're going to be reading one Ray Bradbury book a month. Sometimes it's a short story collection like this. Other times it's a novella or a novel. But we're going to be reading this one. Oh God, what month are we doing that in? I believe we're reading this one in September. Editing me will confirm that. But I believe we're reading this in September. And, you know, when people think of Ray Bradbury, what do they think of? They think of Fahrenheit 451, The Illustrated Man, Halloween Tree, October Country, Something Wicked This Way Comes. But actually, he's written a lot of short story collections later on in his life, say in the 90s and the 2000s, that frankly, a lot of people haven't read and they haven't even heard of before. And this is one of them. I read this one a long time ago, and I really did enjoy it. Kind of different than, you know, his older stuff, which is kind of more sci-fi based. His newer collections can kind of be all over the place with different genres, and I remember really enjoying this one. So if you want to join the Ray Bradbury book club, just sign up on the Bookastromer Discord, and we're going to be reading this one in September, so hopefully y'all agree with me. And now let's talk about my favorite author of all time. No, it's not Stephen King. A lot of y'all are always confused by that, but he's my second favorite author. My favorite author of all time is George R.R. Martin. And of course, he's infamously known for writing A Song of Ice and Fire, which got turned into Game of Thrones. Everyone knows about that, but hardly anyone knows about his other stuff that he wrote in the 70s and the 80s, and that actually won him more awards than what he's gotten for Song of Ice and Fire, which is kind of crazy. But the book that I want to shout out is Windhaven, which was actually co-written by, or with, Lisa Tuttle, and it's actually a standalone fantasy novel. I've read this, I think, late last year, and really enjoyed my time with it. I think a lot of y'all will as well. Definitely underrated just because, again, you think of George R.R. Martin, A Song of Ice and Fire, but a lot of his older stuff, at least in my opinion, obviously, because he's my favorite author, but a lot of his older stuff is definitely worth checking out and this one is no exception. The setting is really cool because it's basically just a bunch of little islands everywhere, and the way that people kind of go back and forth is with these wings that are passed down from generation to generation. And we follow a main character at the beginning where she's kind of young and she really wants to get a hold of these wings. And there's a lot of really interesting family dynamics here and politicking going on. And just the wings themselves, that's the idea of using them to fly across all of these different islands, I thought was very engaging. So yeah, definitely check this out if anything I just said agrees with you. So yeah, definitely check this out if you're interested in reading George's older stuff, because this is definitely one of his best. The next book I want to talk about is by one of my all-time favorite authors, possibly my third or fourth favorite author of all time. It's not Brandon Sanderson. He'll come up later on the list, but I'm actually talking about Lisa Jewell. I love Lisa Jewell. I've given a lot of her newer books, especially stuff like Then She Was Gone and None of This Is True. I've given all of those 5 stars. They're all excellent. She's one of my favorite mystery thriller authors of all time. This is actually one of her older books. I think it came out in like the late 2000s or maybe early 2010s. I'm not quite sure, but not a lot of people have heard of this. And this is actually like a kind of like an updated version, like a newer version. It's called The Truth About Melody Browne. I won't call this a thriller. It's more of a mystery because it's about someone who is kind of remembering something that happened in her past, and it's very good. It's very compelling. Yeah, I don't want to say too much more about it, but yeah, you find out the truth about Melody Browne. So if you're a big Lisa Jewell fan and you've never heard of this one, definitely check this out. I won't say it's as great as her newer stuff that's like really gripping, but if you really like the character work that she does in all of her books, it's definitely in this one as well. I think I gave this one like 4.5 stars just because it's not quite as good as, you know, like a lot of her other stuff, but definitely worth checking out if you're a big Lisa Jewell fan. Another author I want to shout out here is Stephen Graham Jones, who's quickly becoming one of my all-time favorite horror authors, if I can say the word horror. But he's written, you know, like the Indian Lake trilogy, you know, My Heart is a Chainsaw, one of my all-time favorite horror books. And he's also written a bunch of other stuff that people know about. But this one, maybe not a lot of people have heard of before. It's actually called Zombie Bake Off. And with a title like that, you pretty much know what you're getting into. It's just basically, it reads like a B camp horror movie. It involves zombies. It involves a bake-off. It involves wrestlers. And throw all that in there and you get a weird concoction that's a lot of fun. It's only like 250 pages with big font. Oh, and there's a donut, which does come into play sometime in the book. And yeah, it's just a lot of fun. Sometimes, you know, Stephen Graham Jones books can kind of get maybe slightly bogged down by like a message or a theme that he's trying to get across, but there's really none of that in here. It's just a lot of horror fun. So if you want a really fun horror book to check out, definitely check out Zombie Bake Off. Another one of my favorite authors of all time is Taylor Jenkins Reid. And of course, some of her best well-known books, Daisy Jones and the Six, Malibu Rising, Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and her newest one, Carrie Soto is Back. They've all been stellar, but actually, and I will say probably my favorite is Daisy Jones and the Six, but I think this book that I'm hiding behind the camera or beneath the camera rivals some of her newer stuff. And I don't think I know a lot of people have read her newer stuff, but this one is just so good. It's called Maybe in Another Life. And this one kind of has a sci-fi element to it because we follow this lady and she's kind of experiencing 2 different timelines. You get, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, oh, what if I did this instead of this? And you get the 2 branching storylines of like, oh, you know, what if I did this and like her life going in that direction, or she goes a different route and this is how her life, and each chapter is basically like, okay, this is how my life would progress if I did this or that. It's very good, very compelling. I love Taylor Jenkins Reid's ability to write interesting characters, have interesting character moments that are very cathartic. She has the very unique ability to blend comedy and drama very well, one of the best in my opinion. And this book is no exception. I really like it. Quite possibly might even be my second or third favorite. Like I said, Daisy Jones is just above everything because I love that book. Of course, it's about classic rock, but this one is also just very good. I love it so much. Definitely check it out if you are a fan of her writing but have only really read her more popular ones. This next book is also by one of my all-time favorite authors. It's actually a very recent read for me. I just finished this a few days ago. I won't say it's my all-time favorite by this author, but it did surprise me in how much I got out of it. And that would, of course, be Haruki Murakami. And this one is actually one of his newer ones called Killing Commendatore. I think this one came out maybe in 2017, late 2010s. And of course, his more popular ones, a couple of them I haven't read yet, but I will. Norwegian Wood, 1Q84. My favorite by him, Hard-Boiled Wonderland, very good. Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, Kafka on the Shore. A lot of people, if they're in that vein of BookTube and Bookdom, they've heard of those Haruki Murakami books, but I don't see a lot of people talking about this one necessarily. And this one surprised me by how much I enjoyed it. It's not a perfect book. I'm not going to say what part of it that I didn't like, but it's about a guy who's an artist, a painter, and he's really good at doing portraits of people for very famous people. And all of a sudden, his wife wants a divorce, so he kind of just quits his life, quits painting, and moves to this random small town in the middle of nowhere. And this also takes place in Japan. Haruki Murakami is Japanese. And, he kind of just moves off into this random part of wherever, and he kind of just quits. But then he starts to meet this neighbor, and his neighbor's very peculiar. He's also living in this house of a very famous artist because one of his friends' dads is this person. And some weird stuff starts happening in the house. And there's a lot of interesting, I don't know, this book is really hard to talk about without spoiling too much, and if you're not already a fan of Haruki Murakami isms. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. It's definitely a book I would consider rereading. Also narrated by Kirby Hayborn, my favorite narrator. Doesn't hurt at all. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and I would say it's up there with some of his more popular stuff. So for this next book, this author is definitely more well-known for this series that she's been writing for a while. This book, however, is a standalone. Not a lot of people have read it or probably have heard of it. I'm, of course, talking about Providence by Caroline Kepnes. And, of course, the books that she's well known for are the Joe Goldberg books, obviously, with the first book being You. It's one of my all-time favorite horror characters is Joe Goldberg. But this one is actually, like I said, a standalone. And the first time I had heard of this book, I had heard someone say that it's got Dexter vibes. Of course, you guys probably know that Dexter is one of my all-time favorite shows besides Family Guy. And whenever an author is mentioned, their book is Dexter-esque, sometimes, it's apt. Sometimes, I'll get suckered in and I don't, love it. But with this one, it definitely has that vibe to it. I don't want to say too much about it because I think it's one of those books. It's better going in not knowing too much. It's a short book. It's 300 some pages. But yeah, definitely, it does have that kind of vibe. There's 3 different character perspectives you get, if I'm remembering correctly. You get a woman, a man, and then an older couple kind of deal. And you kind of see how their stories interplay. But I remember this book being very, very good. I'll be honest though, some of the details are kind of hazy because I haven't read it in a long time, but I definitely am itching to reread it just because I remember how good this book made me feel. But yeah, it's a really fun book from what I remember. And yeah, if you've read Caroline Kepnes and you do like her writing style, definitely check out her standalone book. I don't think it gets nearly enough love as it should. And like I mentioned previously in the video, there is a Sanderson book on this list. It is kind of hard, though, to call anything by Sanderson underrated just because, definitely this corner of BookTube, Sanderson is so prolific and so famous, and a lot of his books just get so much praise. But a lot of that tends to be with his Cosmere stuff or, sort of his newer young adult stuff, like Skyward and that whole series. But for me, probably his most underrated book that I really like, because really my main love for Sanderson is Cosmere, but this is like the main non-Cosmere book that I really love by Sanderson, and that's The Rithmatist. This, so far, is a standalone. He has said previously that there could be sequels and that he has no idea when he's going to get to them. I really want a sequel to The Rithmatist because I really did enjoy this one. I gave it 4.5 stars. It definitely reads, like a middle grade young adult kind of book. The reason why this is very cool, Sanderson's obviously well known for his magic systems. This one deals with chalk, like chalk drawings, and it kind of reminded me of the show, I don't know if you guys have heard of this, Chalk Zone. I think this came on either Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon, but I always thought the concept was really cool. Like you could draw something with chalk and it would come to life. Kind of basically what this is. It's magic system, that's kind of based off of that. And you follow this one kid who, of course, does not have this ability. He's one of the rare people that doesn't have this ability, but he's going to, a school where, a lot of the kids can do this. And there is definitely a cool mystery element to this because he kind of gets wrapped up in things. And yeah, it's very fun. It takes place kind of in, I guess kind of in the United States, but it's like futuristic and they're all kind of broken up into islands at this point, I guess because of some type of global warming maybe with water being everywhere, but it was pretty interesting the way everything worked. So yeah, if you love Sanderson and you've read almost everything by him, or you've only read the Cosmere, or maybe you didn't get along with his other young adult stuff, I would say definitely try this one. It definitely reads kind of like a Cosmere book, except obviously it's much shorter, much more condensed, and I would say more focused. You really got the main character, the boy, who's kind of going through everything. And yeah, it's just a lot of fun. So yeah, definitely recommend The Rithmatist. And the last book I have to shout out today is by the author Dan Wells, who of course is very well known for I Am Not a Serial Killer, the John Cleaver series, one of my all-time favorite series, one of my all-time favorite characters. Love John Cleaver, but Dan Wells has written some other stuff, including this really cool standalone that probably not a lot of people have read. It's actually called Extreme Makeover. And kind of the one sentence that I use to describe this book to kind of get people hooked on it, it's the apocalypse that's set upon by cosmetics, or that's caused by cosmetics. And, you hear that and you're like, how does that make any sense? But it's a lot of fun. It's a horror book, but it's also a satire, so there's a lot of humor in here. It's very fun. And this is actually going to be our Thrill, Chill, or Kill book club pick for the month of October. It's going to be a lot of fun, so definitely check this out. If any of what I just said sounds amusing or cool to you, and also, if you're a big John Cleaver fan like me and you're wanting to read more Dan Wells, definitely check this out. This is probably the best thing he's written besides John Cleaver. All right, so those are all of my underrated picks by underrated, or no, I messed that up. These are all of my underrated books by popular authors. So definitely let me know if you agree with my picks here. Do you think these are underrated? I think they're underrated. Also, do you agree with me that these are the best underrated books by these authors? And just in general, what are your favorite underrated books by popular authors? I want to know all of that down in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe both to the Bookish Drummer and the Bookish Drummer Discord, where, like I've mentioned, a few of these books we're actually going to be buddy reading. So we're doing Driving Blind in September by Ray Bradbury, and we're doing Extreme Makeover by Dan Wells in October. And yeah, definitely just check all these books out if you're a fan of any of these authors. So yeah, that's my spiel for today. Thank you guys so much for watching and have a fantastic day.